bonjour, koi koi, sego, hello, bonjour.
Welcome to Aki's studio. We are live here.
Live!
Actually live. We're just imagining all of you sitting in these seats over here.
In your pajamas, at home, eating good snacks.
Welcome to the 34th Annual Trickster Festival.
We don't say the name of the festival right now because snow has not fallen and has not stayed, and so right now we're just calling it Trickster Festival until that happens.
My name is Isaac Thomas, Managing Director, Native Earth Performing Arts.
My name is Keith Barker, and I'm fat and old. I'm the Artistic Director at Native Earth Performing Arts. I'm also a proud member of the Métis Nation of Ontario. My maternal grandfather was born in Mattawa, Ontario, but I was raised mostly in Treaty 3 territory, which is Kenora, but also the Robinson Superior Treaty territory, which is Thunder Bay. Before we go any further, we'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Lee Miracle. Our thoughts and prayers go out to her friends, her family, and her community, and what better way to celebrate Lee than by art.
Native Earth would not exist were it not for our predecessors, like Lee, and for the generations of storytellers who came before us. The Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewa and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. For all of us, including myself as a South Asian immigrant, storytelling is a way of connecting with our ancestors. We narrate our histories, we reflect our present, we shape the future. And this festival is a way of introducing to you a whole generation of storytellers who are shaping our future.
Speaking of future, we wouldn't have a future without funders, so we should acknowledge them. We acknowledge the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council, but also Heritage Canada, who has been a longtime supporter of the festival.
We'd like to thank the foundations, Metcalf, Chalkers, the Green Sanderson Family Foundation, the Pat and Tony Adams Freedom Fund for the Arts, Hal Jackman Foundation, the Toronto Foundation, and most particularly the Kingfisher Foundation.
We couldn't do any of this work without our staff, so a big shout out to our venue coordinator, Brian, to our head of marketing, Abby, to our box office aficionado, head of box office, Alex, to our director of the Animiki program, Lindsay, and also our arts administrator, Kristen, who just makes sure everyone gets paid.
Particularly the festival staff, Martin, and most definitely Sue Ballant, who's sitting over here right now. Who's done a massive amount of heavy lifting to make sure this festival happens.
My turn?
Your turn.
Okay. Tonight, we are going to take you on a journey. We invite you into a conversation with Dr. Lindsay Lachance as she speaks about, well, I'll let her explain everything because, you know, actually, they're way smarter than we are, so we'll let you go.
Way smarter.
Way smarter. So we'll let them explain it. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello, everyone. We are so excited to be here tonight as part of the We Sagachuk Begins to Dance Festival number 34. And we are going to be having a conversation with you folks today, centering around Indigenous dramaturgical practices. My name is Lindsay Lachance, and I am from an Algonquin Anishinaabe family. I am reporting live from Algonquin Anishinaabe territory outside at the Gatineau River, and I am also the Animiki Creators Unit program coordinator this year. So I'm so excited to be involved in the festival and to be here tonight. And just to begin, I just wanted to share a little bit, start us off in a way that helps to orient the conversation. This is an image of the Gatineau River, the one that I am also looking out through the window. And this is an offering created by my friend, my kin, Mari Brakupe, who's an Algonquin Anishinaabe artist. And this image represents the flow of the Gatineau River and some birch trees behind it. So you'll find that tonight we're speaking a lot about land-based work. We're speaking a lot about structures that influence the way that we create and tell stories that are different from the prey tags, the pyramid that we learn about in school, or the ways that dramaturgy is often taught or talked about in Western non-Indigenous studio spaces. So we just wanted to help open up our eyes, our hearts today to different kinds of structures that are going to be influencing our work. And for me, rivers and birch trees are a great part of that. And I wanted to start with that this evening. And it's my extreme pleasure to be able to share this space with three amazing Indigenous artists who have inspired my work for many years, who continue to inspire me, who I love having conversations with. And I'm going to let these amazing folks introduce themselves.
Onin, bonjour, sego. Jill Carter, Nadishnikas. Ze Dagaranto, Nadunjaba, Anishinaabe, Aqua Ashkenazi Kwayandao, University of Toronto, Nitanoki. So I'm Jill Carter. I'm an Anishinaabe, mixed blood Anishinaabe Ashkenazi woman, born and largely raised here where the trees grow out of the water. Ze Dagarando. I work at the University of Toronto as an assistant professor in the Center for Drama, Theatre, Performance Studies, Indigenous Studies, and the Transitional Year Program. But my real work and my great joy happens when I get to work in theatre with young artists, and also when I work with First Story Toronto as a researcher and guide storying the land. And now I would like to pass it on to Monique to introduce herself, or Spy, I'm sorry. Professor Jill.
Bonjour, Anis, Spy Indigenous, Timiskaming and Dojabal, Southwestern Ontario, Ndida. So thanks a lot for having me part of this conversation. I'm joining in as someone who works with sound and words and visual materials to explore different understandings of our stories, and to build on these ideas around ethical practices, dramaturgical practices, and how we can layer these as we go forward in our work as creatives. I'll pass it over to Monique now.
Noedi, Noigambi, Anuga Olo Nadili, Olo Edidili, Ganosota. I'm Monique Mojica. I was born Kuna and Rappahannock, which is both Central and North American Indigenous, and adopted into the Cayuga Bear Clan at Six Nations. I am generation 3 of 4 generations of performers in my family. I have for most of my life been an actor, dancer, actor, playwright, but moving very happily into dramaturgy. I find that in the last few years, the satisfaction of being able to support other artists to realize their vision is what has really fed me. And part of the reason for that is, as what Lindsay touched on, is that as we're all going to talk about the areas of dramaturgy, Indigenous dramaturgy, land-based dramaturgy, embodied dramaturgies, and culturally specific dramaturgies that we're involved in and that excite us, it's still really, really difficult to bring those ways of working, those ways of knowing, those ways, those perceptions and those cultural values into the institutions and the industry of producing the product of theater. That I was kind of joking around saying we don't have a big enough shoehorn for that. And I came into dramaturgy with the hopes that creating our own structures will shift the paradigm, that creating our own structures and putting our lands and our bodies, putting our bodies back on the land will help us to heal and undo some of that colonial violence, much of which is normalized and very active in our theaters and arts institutions.
Awesome. I think it is so important to start there and to sort of chat a little bit about what some of these processes are. So you mentioned bringing our bodies to the land, embodied dramaturgy, land-based dramaturgies. So what are some examples of these ways of working? And second part, like how have you tried to incorporate these ways of working under the institution, within the institution, or where do you find that maybe they just don't belong?
We're going back to Jill? You going around again or just jumping in?
Okay. All right. I'll start. So I've sort of, I've talked about what I quote do for a living and for my personal joy. And it's all the same thing. I'm just a storyteller. And my reason for being where I'm being or landing where I've landed is to tell story and to be a contributor in shifting that paradigm, and shifting that paradigm for myself as an urban Indigenous woman, reconnecting with land, but also shifting the paradigm for the people I work with and educate. In all of my work, I work largely, but not entirely, with non-Indigenous people. I'm an educator in a university that's full of non-Indigenous colleagues and non-Indigenous students. And I feel that it's very important that they develop a relationship with this land, that they understand our ways, that they understand how the land has directed our structures of governance, our structures of learning, pedagogy, our structures of being and behaving. And so that instead of working against this as the colonial project has done, and therefore endangering all life on these territories and on this planet, that they get with the program. And I find that that there is a separation. I mean, we're talking about structure. And I've come to believe, to understand over my years of learning and my own journey, that content is not enough. Just speaking to people's brain and saying, here's a story, we can both believe the content of the same creation story. But if it has been filtered through a Western structure, that pyramid that Lindsay is talking about, the way the behaviors that we will adopt after having supposedly adopted this creation story will be very, very different. So content or structure does affect the content. So when we think of the structures of storytelling, and we see these spirals, we see the spirals, the rings in the trees. We see the spirals in the planetary bodies. We see the spirals. We cast a stone upon the water. And if we're telling a story or enacting something, it's as if, for me, I've cast a stone upon the water and all these spirals and stories within stories come out of that. And so even that, the land there has directed our ways of being since time immemorial, and should, I believe, and direct the way we tell those stories now, the way we the way we empower ourselves, the way we reestablish our connections with land, and the way we affect those around us who need to change their behaviors. And so seeking those ways, taking people out onto the land is so important. Whether it's in a theatrical project or simply telling a story as an instructor, and having them, teaching them to listen in a different way, listen with their entire being, is work, because those structures of separation are still so embedded. Often I work with people at the university who say, well, they're all into, truth and reconciliation. And, so they say, well, let's do a mural, or let's do this in this building. But to them, their building is separate from all the other buildings. And that plot of land is separate from all the other plots of land around them. And so they want the facts, and then each fact is a separate fact. This happened here, or this is the site of the eugenics movement, or this is the site of the nutritional experiments, the birth of this. And for them, they say, well, thank you for those facts. But they're not seeing the interconnections, the way like a river, all of these thoughts, all of this spirit is connected with all the other land and all the other bodies within it. And so I'm not going to talk very much longer. We can come back to this if we want to, but working with story with these people and taking them down those paths and having them experience that web of connection and understanding where perhaps this building or this institution or this one story that they've now learned as a fact sits and spreads across the land and connects everybody. And so this is the work that I try to do, and I'm seeking to do through a multiplicity of ways, having worked with Monique and Lindsay and Spy and many others. And I'll just stop there so that others can talk, and we can come back and talk about specifics later. Miigwech.
Yeah, I really like the offer that you proposed of content is not enough. And I think that that offer is something that can really help folks understand or start to think about why dramaturgy, why process and structure is so important, because it sort of acts as a translation work almost. So how the story that someone's writing or embodying, how it can be translated through a process, through ways of working into a theatrical performance. And this sort of makes me think of something that Monique has talked a lot about, which is this idea around literacy. So looking back to the image of the river, like how do we read a river and find story? Or how do we look to other aspects of the land to find story or to interpret story for a theatrical piece, for a performative piece? So maybe we can transition into a couple of examples or ways that we understand literacy, which I heard from you, Monique, so I love this idea.
This is what I've been working with, and it's really what I have the most passion about at the moment. and working with this idea. I've been working with body on land, embodying land, and that loop, that going back and forth. And I realized in the work that I was doing that there was a territory that is the intersection between body literacy, which is movement literacy, knowing how to read the body, knowing how to use the body to best communicate, to tell a story. And there's land literacy, reading energy flow in the land, and reading things like trail marker trees that Jill mentioned, effigy mounds, and earthworks. And that brought me into realizing that I was working in pattern literacy and without even knowing the term. It's a new term for me, and it's the place where for me, the intersection of body literacy and land literacy passes through that intersection, which includes things like petroglyphs, pictographs, and the energy flow, and all of the knowledge that is encoded in the iconic forms that contain that knowledge. And it led me to something that I really knew nothing about, which is permaculture, which is the people who work the land. And it's like what Indigenous folks have done for millennia, is work that. And I wanted to read a few things. I wanted to read something from an article that I found. It's not new article. It's from July 1998. I want to read an excerpt from that. And I also want to, now that I've spent several years, good many years, writing a book with Brenda Farnell, who is a movement specialist and a professor of cultural anthropology at the University of Illinois. We have finished and submitted our manuscript about how we created the Mola Dulat, which is the dramaturgical tool. It's a movement score that we use to build Chocolate Woman Dreams the Milky Way. That book's coming out next year, called Chocolate Woman Dreams the Milky Way, Mapping Embodied Indigenous Performance. So I want to read a little excerpt from that too, where we wrote down stuff that's really hard to disembody and write down. So since that's done, I want to read an excerpt from that too. But this article is from folks who are permaculture people. Patterning as Process by Tim Murphy and Vicky Marvick. Energy organizes itself in multi-dimensional relationships. Tissue builds around the flow of energy and becomes the physical expression or embodiment of that energy. Form. The essential nature of the flow and the corresponding nature of the medium which it is passing determines its expression in form. Energies moving over and around form further shape it. Patterns such as turbulence, spiraling, oscillation, collection and runout or distribution, orbit, succession, growth, and decay nest within it. The beauty of patterns is that they simultaneously reveal configuration, connectivity, and community. Patterns stack information, more information that can be described in words or quantified by any number of lists. So when Jill was talking about the spiral, that symbol of the spiral is in so many of our cultures, but all of the knowledge, the cosmological knowledge, the kinship knowledge, the knowledge of emergence in land and place is encoded in that in a way that's beyond a thesis, beyond a novel. And that's the place where our material culture comes into play. And I have, for myself, activated using Kuna material culture and mound builder, of which the Powhatan and the Rappahannock are part of, effigy mound and mound builder culture, to create and produce, two production level, two works of my own. And I have 6 other projects where I've been working with other people, some quite long term. I just did the third in a trilogy, a triptych with Santee Smith that we began in 2014. That was 7 years going through the three, in the triptych. I figured out just the other day that PJ Prudat and I have been working since 2013, and respectively, Santee Smith's dramaturgical model was pottery. She comes from a family of Mohawk ceramicists, so we used the aesthetic principles of creating a ceramic pot as the structure for that triptych. And other things came into it, including other words and principles of permaculture, because I just read out a few of them. There's a whole list more that if we have time, I'll go through them. And PJ and I have been working with the Métis fire bag as a dramaturgical structure. Ruffney Caribou, who is part of the Animiki project, is working with the structure of how a thunderstorm, how that's built. Tennille Whiskeyjack is a Cree theater creator out in Alberta. She's working with the process of setting up a lodge, a sweat lodge. I also worked with someone who's not at all a theater creator. She's a photographer. Eli Farinango is Quechua from Ecuador, and we did a video project of hers using the chumbi, which is the women's sash from Quechua, and Natalie Sapier, who is Wolostok, using basketry. So it allows or compels us to learn these things from our material culture, which also encode cosmology, perception, language. If you go into it, those things are included. So I can read another little excerpt of pattern literacy, and then someone else can talk. This is from the book. Pattern literacy. This dynamic form of body literacy is deeply connected to and intersects with what Santa Clara Pueblo sculptor and visionary Roxanne Svenzel, director of the Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute in New Mexico, calls pattern literacy, a way of seeing the world that recognizes and responds to natural patterns and their relationships rather than as separate objects. During the early creation phase of Chocolate Woman Dreams the Milky Way, becoming pattern literate in the aesthetics of Kuna culture was one of the first things that had to happen. The first embodied movement to emerge during improvisation was the spiral phrase described, which evolved from the movement encoded in the icon of the Akebandu. We were already working with pattern literacy without knowing the term. If one allows that reconnection between the body and the land, returning the body to natural patterns, ways of seeing, being, and knowing as ways of healing, one can receive sensory information experientially. The intellect can take a long time to catch up with this information. Roxanne Svenzel reminds us that becoming pattern literate means coming home, which is one reason why the journey home to land, place, family, and nationhood in Kunayala, that's where my family is from, was necessary. Embodying iconic patterns enables an unwinding of the harm done by colonial forces as it reconnects us to ourselves, to land, place, kinship, and nationhood. Healing modalities such as osteopathy and somatic practices such as idiokinesis, Feldenkrais, and Alexander techniques or yoga are based on the premise that body movement can lay down and create new neural and neuromuscular pathways. Why is this not also true for artistic expression? We are working from the premise that the embodiment of pictographic and other iconic forms and natural energy patterns can also create new neural and neuromuscular pathways and has the potential to be the antidote to corpus nullius by healing the violence inflicted on the body through the colonial precepts of terra nullius / corpus nullius. So that means body belonging to no one and land belonging to no one, which is the whole reason they came and took everything. Petroglyphs and pictographs, as well as trail marker trees, or the rhythms of the formation of the land, its sounds, textures, and smells, all provide maps, resources for finding that intersection between body literacy and land literacy. They intersect with energy patterns in the natural world in that region and guide us how to be on that land, how to live in balance with what is there. That's what I've been using as a premise for creating theater, creating performance, whether I'm working on my own work or leading another artist, whether it's someone who's been at it a long time like Santee, or someone who's young and fresh like Breffney, and this kind of work takes a long time. It takes years to come to. And even though I started working with PJ in 2013, the first thing we did was to go to her homelands. We went to her ancestral lands in Saskatchewan. She had started way before that, maybe another 10 years or so before that, with the archival work and the family trees and stories. And so she was, I think we counted up 22 years that the things that she had to go through, and the creation of ceremonial family, creation of spiritual life in order to support creating the art. It's life-changing. When you go in on this level, it has a power that I don't think that we have fully understood yet, but I firmly believe that this work can be an antidote to that colonial violence. Because if that colonial violence started with land belonging to no one, body belonging to no one, and we reconnect our body belonging to us, to land that we understand holds all the knowledge and history of the ancients, all our ancestors, our bloodlines, our DNA, then that's revolutionary. But you have to be willing to be an outlaw to work that way, because the way that theater is created, at least in North America, does not support it. Yeah, Peggy.
I'm glad, yes, bringing in that the work is radical, which is so exciting to think about. And I mean, this idea of like returning to the land or practicing land-based work as radical might seem strange to some people, but as you're saying, it's hard, long work. And I mean, it's not obvious that kind of work belongs in a black box studio.
Right. And maybe it doesn't all the time.
Right. So Spy and Jill as well, both of you, I think of specific examples where you both have worked in collaboration with the land, rocks I'm thinking about for Spy and marker trees for Jill. Is it okay to hear a bit about your experiences with your reading the land?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in a little bit here. It's really enjoyable to listen to everyone else as well, because it kind of, in a way, I think I'm going to be picking up on some of those points and bouncing off of them, because they really do inform the way I work in a lot of ways. Funny enough, I spend a lot of time gardening. I spend a lot of time taking some walks, and I really enjoy getting familiar with the places around me when working. And I think there's this aspect of improvisation that comes to mind in my work. Um, and improvisation is actually not just some sort of randomness. It's actually really built on actually like a lot of systems of knowledge like that you've acquired or have accumulated over a period of time. And then it just seems so innate when you get to that point where you can problem solve something or invent a new idea or take an entirely unexpected direction. And I think a lot about that. And part of it is I'm just thinking of this past year in the new place that I'm living. I've been spending regularly taking walks every day. And some of the paths that I walk are the same, like I'm walking the same path. But what's really neat is watching how the landscape changes over the course of the spring through parts of the summer into the fall. And I'm when we're talking about taking time, I'm excited about the next year and the following year to see if my recollection of when certain plants emerge and leave, and then new ones emerge, and then some come back, like they're multi-bloomers. I'm thinking like the black eye Susans. There's some that have just popped up. They're little kind of out of season right now, but they just, and I sort of chuckled to myself thinking it's a really wonderful example of resilience or resistance. It's like, no, I'm not ready for this snow to come yet, And I laugh to myself when I see that, because I'm like, good on you that you know how to be in this way. And that's partly something I think about. I also think about the point that Monique was talking about in terms of permaculture. It's interesting because I garden and plant that way. This year I decided to try something a little different, where I started to plant like peppers and vegetables, really interesting vegetables and peppers between coneflowers. And the outcome was really neat. And the flavor of the food was wonderful too. Like like some of the best salads I've had, this year was because of that. And so I spent time with that. I spent time also learning about the seasons just upon the arrival and the departure of certain birds. I kind of can know, like when I was familiar when certain birds left last year and now they arrived. I'm like, oh, here we go. We're just about ready for the, what, I'm gonna be shoveling in no time at all. But it's really neat how they are messengers. They're sending that to us as well. They're probably the most literate, if you want to talk about literacy, are all the animal life, especially birds. And it's really neat when if you spend some time looking at what they're doing and how they're doing it, you can see that they're really some of our foremost teachers, actually. So it's neat because when I'm doing that work, my dramaturgy is a lot informed by like careful listening. I'm trying to differentiate the difference between critical listening and careful listening. They mean two different things to me. And for me, careful listening is something where you are completely immersive and you allow it to teach you, as opposed to with critical listening, there's an underlying assumption that you're going to listen, but you're going to be critical to teach back. And I'm not there to teach back. The land's teaching me what I need to know to do my work. And so as a result, it actually informs a lot of really interesting compositions for me, and even some of my own writing I sort of say, I jumped through both of those worlds a bit and others as well. But I think in terms of when I'm trying to tell a story, it helps determine whether some of it should be told through the music that I write, or should it be actually embodied by an actor to be spoken, or a singer to be sung. So that's really kind of cool when you can spend some time, when you become improvisational, you have a better sense of like trusting your art. And the more adept you become at that, the better judge of like the art form and how you want to approach your art form it becomes with time. So those are some initial thoughts I have. Does that connect? Yeah. Okay. I'll leave it at that, and I'll probably jump back into converse some more. I'll pass it over to Jill, who I suspect has something to say too.
Miigwech, Spy. Wow, it's so beautiful to talk to you all. I'm getting more and more excited. My recent work has been around, I suppose, seeking reasons or seeking to understand more why my body reacts in certain ways in certain spaces. To think about, oh, is that wind really bad? Should I mute for now? Hide my microphone. I'll come over here. Sorry. I'm outside because I think better outside. So I'm a bit diehard. I'll be out here till the snow falls in my little outdoor office. But yes, so I've been doing projects where I've been really thinking about what stories sit in the land. And some of these stories are not the nice stories. They're the stories about colonial depredation. They're the stories that remain sort of hidden and covered over. For instance, I work in an institution where there's a land acknowledgement, and it's like, thank you to all these original stewards, the Wendat, the Seneca, the Mississauga, and thank you so much. We love the opportunity to work on this land, and now we're on to our next thing. We've acknowledged this, and now we're all reconciled and everything's happy. But nothing is acknowledged in terms of why perhaps I may walk past a certain building or into a certain building and feel my knees buckling under me, why I'm suddenly hit with a negative force. And so I've been exploring these things, both in my own neighborhood. I live on top of a Wendat village. And I know a little bit because of my work with First Story and my research. I'm learning more and more about this village that I live on top of. I know where the original Three Sisters gardens were, the acres of corn, beans, and squash. I know where the artisanal freshwater spring is buried. I know the trail, the north-south trail, which is half a block away from me, running north and south outside the village. And I walk that trail, and particularly since COVID, I have been walking that trail every day and every night, walking the borders of these villages, looking for those marker trees, listening, looking at the planetary movements from season to season, night to night, and I'm no expert. I'm learning, and so often I'm very frustrated with my lack of understanding. But I've been thinking about these stories and how to also allow the land to speak them through us, human agents, so that perhaps there is a release and a cleansing, a release of some kind. So some years ago, I defended my dissertation. I'm going to share this for a moment. This is not about Jill's dissertation, but for instance, can I find it? Yeah, there it is. I'm just going to share my screen for a moment. Sorry, technology. Here we go, and here we go. So I'm just going to share my screen for a moment, and in the top right of the screen, you see this lovely little homestead. It's a pretty nice, nicely maintained building. I defended my dissertation in this house as an Indigenous woman in 2010. And so I defended my work, the research I had done, the work I had been doing in this house, which is the signage, and the signage that lives here on this property is, it says the School of Graduate Studies, the address 63 St. George. And then there's a little plaque. And it's very interesting to see people, especially at the beginning of September, the beginning of the term, walking by and taking pictures of this plaque, which celebrates the builder of this house, an iron founder, and also, of course, the first inhabitant of this house, Sir John A. Macdonald, who lived in this house from 1876 to 1878, and then he passed it on to his son. And of course, we all know that 1876 is the year he signed the Indian Act into legislation in Canada. A year after he moved out of this house, he commissioned Nicholas Flood Davin to spend 45 days from commission to publication to write 45 days, 6 weeks, to write a report on how to best implement a residential school system to re-educate the children. And of course, that 45 days it took him to create this report, set of recommendations, affected 7 generations of our people. And none of this is acknowledged in this place, this haunted place. This place inhabited by a man who played with spirits on every level. He invoked spirits in his seances while he condemned our people for their superstitions and banned our ceremonies. And at the same time, he drank a lot of spirits. This is a very spiritual home, spirit filled. And so to understand more, or to maybe just pull these stories out into consciousness, bring them into the world, because maybe the land is screaming to bring this into the world so that our knees can stop buckling when we walk up to that 3rd floor window to defend our work as Indigenous people, so that we're not hit with the force of these spirits when we walk by this house. So these are the things I attempt to do. And what I found so interesting, and I didn't take these photos at the left and at the bottom right, but I worked on a project, and we probably don't have much time to show anything, but I worked on a live stream project, which actually with a group of people who storied this house and restoried this house, working on the land and working with whatever the land was offering us. And on Canada Day this past year, one of our company, a settler member of our company, had gone to Nathan Phillips Square, and of course, rather than the red and white celebration, she witnessed an orange activation, right? An orange shirt activation. And then afterwards, she had ridden her bike up to the house and saw all these orange daylilies. And I've been at this university 20 years, and I have not seen, these are landscapers plant these things. I had not seen this. And I wondered, is this an acknowledgement of some kind, an honoring of some kind, or is this just a serendipitous thing? Or did the land speak to them subliminally and say, you orange today, orange this year? I have my theories about this. At the same time, she found this empty, broken nest just on the pathway towards the front porch of this house. And the land was just saying, this is what this is. This is what this has resulted. And this is perhaps a shirt of shame for this house. And we did a lot of work around this, thinking about the fears that nest in this house. And so now I'm talking too much. And so I should perhaps stop now. But these are the things I'm looking for. Also the messaging that's coming out of the land, whether it's through tree markers, et cetera, et cetera.
So maybe we can just make our couple of final offers around how we hope to continue to integrate these kinds of processes, whether it's in the academic world or within artistic institutions. I know we're all working in collaboration with different folks, but maybe like a couple of thoughts around how we can further incorporate mentorship for emerging artists or help to advocate for outside the black box kinds of processes for creating new work.
Yeah, I've been doing almost all of my work in the last little while with people who are interested in working this way and choosing not to force to throw our fragile brown bodies up against the bricks of the institutions, but going into those situations where it's already a given. Of course, we have to start in ceremony. Of course, we have to start on the land. Of course, we have to make our offerings to all of the stories and all of the spirits who bring us the information of those stories. And knowledge transfer has been really important to me in the last little while. I've been doing this a long time. And I feel like the only way that shift in the paradigm that we were talking about at the beginning is going to happen is if there's enough of us saying that, well, this is the way we have to work, that it is absolutely foundational to the work that we do. We have to be able to smudge no matter what, that is a prerequisite to what we do, that whatever protocols need to be completed has to happen without question. And I think I also want to return to both, Spy was talking about improvisation, and maybe you can go back to that to also, Spy, and that I think that in that area of deep improv, that realm of deep improv is not the same as, but lives kind of next door to ceremonial life. A lot of the things that I understand about how to create this way, I understand from having a ceremonial life. And that's where the dialogue happens. It's not something that you can go in all assigned and mapped out on that hierarchy ahead of time. You have to create the circumstances, that support, that best support. I'm losing my words here. You have to create that the environment that best supports that dialogue to happen. And then you trust, you make your offerings and you trust. And the way that we do it, the way that we work is really critical. We are trained in Western theater that the most important thing is the product, right? The production. The show must go on. But what I am much more interested in and much more excited about is the process. And within these processes, I firmly believe there is power. And I think that's why there's so much pushback against them too.
Mm.
Yeah, I think perhaps by reframing how we value process, we might realize that process is a product. It is a product, and actually it might be in some way more tangible, more interesting and exciting if we could live alongside that work. And I find it really cool when some audience or people who are participating as, let's say, a witness of some sort, they really are excited to learn through that process. Like, how is this, magical storytelling told? How did it develop? And I've often found people really engaged in that. So I don't think we should be undervaluing that necessarily, or perhaps view it as just as that as important as like just arriving to a show, lights up, and we watch something and then we leave. Great, wonderful, maybe we get a talk back. But I think it's really cool when we can value that, because in my mind sometimes that is as much the product. And I'm thinking about an example, because going back to the thing you were asking about, the spy with the rocks, yeah, just because that seems probably out of context for some people, was I really that's one element, right? There's trees, there's plant life, and bird life, all those other things. Plant life, I brought some like even seeds from tobacco plants that I just harvested, because like one seed produced like tons. So I remember getting this really cool, like, it's if I don't know if it was a teaching or a lesson or just wisdom that someone shared. And they said, when you can grow tobacco, it's usually a sign that, because your soil or you're ready to do it, and I've been having some, I guess, good luck the past few years, and just excited because, just to go, this seed now I'm starting to see its generations, right? It's like living to see intergenerational. I don't have to be past. I don't have to be past tense. I'm already past tense in the present. It's kind of cool. Just if that's like just out there, I realize that, but that it gets me really kind of thrilled to understand not just the theory and the method, but to live it. It's like it's happening. And I was thinking about that in terms of our it's a land-based research creative project that I'm co-leading right now. And we started the project going back to the lands where I'm from, and spent some time near a place called Kanagami Lake. And there was just some rain that had happened, and we were passing along the highway. This is along Highway 11, and there's this really cool sound that the highways make, and they sound different when you're going through cut rock that are on either side, like Canadian Shield. And there was just one spot. We came over the bridge of Lake Kanagami, and just the sound, the way it ricocheted off at the side of the rocks, it caused me to look while I was driving, and then I caught something with these two big slabs of rock on the side of the highway. So I pulled over, turned around with everyone's permission to do that, take some time. Said, this is where this work starts. This is where we put our first offering. This is just spoke right away, and we could all see it. It was really awesome. There was this really, the structures of the rock, which were blasted. It was a really violent thing that had occurred, obviously, to make way for this highway. There was some really amazing text within the rocks itself. So they weren't carved by people. They weren't this or that. They weren't something from someone 5,000 years ago. It was actually just its own formation, but yet there were structures within it. a certain kind of text within it that spoke. And I end up saying, okay, I'll write a piece called Highway Suite for this, because it's like, it's so cool. It's so improvisational. This slab of rock here that got separated. It was actually one formation that got cut open to make way for a highway. And I was like, oh, I'm going to create this highway suite so I can have them talk to each other again, because they're old friends that just got separated and they're seeing each other, but they need to talk to each other. And I could hear it just the way the sound of the highway of when trucks and vehicles were going by, and myself, like it just bounces off. If you really, again, listen very carefully, it will speak. And it was so cool because I just finished part of that work that's going to be published alongside with the image of that rock. And I'm just thrilled because it was one of those things where I was like, see, this is like, yeah, cool. Like, you know, I composed it, but really I composed it in collaboration. Like those rocks were the singing. Like that's a definition of a singing rock to me. And it's just cool, you know, they have that these stones and these rocks have melody, and then to go and spend some time climbing some mounts, like mountains up where I'm from, and being like in a way really connected to the same foot traffic that ancestors had walked from all over, right? Like from all over up in that region, or that people would portage to get to. It's just amazing. It's amazing. And so your sense of time space is so different. It's truncated, it's tiny. When we say this is long, it's actually not. It's smaller than these flecks of like little tobacco seeds. It just boom. So you use it wisely, do it as best you can and use it wisely. And I think sometimes it's good to not overthink it. If I had overthought, oh, is this where I should start? This is where it would never have begun. And it had already begun. It told me, there it was, boom. You know, and it's cool. It's just cool when you just trust that. So that's an important dramaturgical impulse to believe and recognize.
Lindsay, I'm aware you haven't spoken about birch bark biting as dramaturgical structure, and I think it's important in this conversation, and also it ties into improv and dialogue.
Sure. Let me see. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see if it will work. So, do we see this
Yes.
and this?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Fantastic. Well, yeah, it's definitely something I can totally relate to what Spy was speaking about. And I love it. That's why you probably heard me say 3 times about Spy and the Rocks. So miigwech for sharing that story. Love it. And I can just briefly speak a little bit about birch bark biting as dramaturgy, because this is something that to me is one of the examples of reading patterns or searching for patterns within material culture. So I was introduced to birch bark biting by Simon and Mari Brakupe, and so I'm definitely not an expert in any means, but I feel comfortable speaking about it because I do some biting, but definitely want to honor the Brakupes as amazing forever teachers and just love them so much. So when it comes to birch bark biting and harvesting the bark, I also do a lot of visiting with the trees that are all around where I live, and offer tobacco and sit with them, even if it's just really while walking my dog or taking my baby out for a walk. We definitely visit with these trees. And in the springtime, you can see that the bark is sort of like offering itself, peeling itself off to be maybe taken by animals to make homes, or for us to make bitings or baskets. And so peeling and harvesting the bark, you'll see that there is actually layers, like pretty thick layers of bark beneath it that you can start to peel. And in peeling the bark, you can make these sorts of squares, cut them out, and you fold them as though you're making like one of those snowflake crafts that you might have made as a child. And you fold up the corners to make, as you can see in this image, like a triangle. And you can use your fingers a little bit to help move your teeth or guide your teeth. Literally use your canines to bite into the bark. So it has to be thin enough so that you don't hurt your teeth. And there are certain aspects of birch bark biting that I realize, like some of the principles of intention. So for example, like you really have to have intention when biting, deep listening as well, listening to your body in relationship to the bark as you're trying to create shape, can really help to like inform the story or inform the process that you want to create. And once you open up your biting, here's like an example of one that I did, that you can start to see shape, you can start to see story in them. And so dramaturgically, you can look to your biting, for example, to sort of say like, okay, are we going to do something cyclical today? Like, is this a bird or an insect that we see? We see wings, so we're looking at flight. Obviously, you see mirroring. And so you can kind of look to your biting for inspiration, for starting points on how to push your story forward. I think this is actually a Spy Catherine picture from when we were in Banff at the Banff Center, and we all went outside and we did a biting in hopes to look to our bitings for a sort of starting point or an inspiration. So there was a lot of like sunrises that people saw. There was a lot of circles, there were hearts. And so oftentimes when I work with someone and we do a birch bark biting, we try to look and name some values or some starting points that come from the biting. So if we think about intention, deep listening for our body and for the bark, we can see stuff emerge or resurfacing. And so oftentimes we can then take these pieces that we've made and ask ourselves, okay, where do we see love in our characters, or where does our body need more connection to trees or sun? So do we come out in the morning? Do we come out at night? So yeah, just trying to use a process that is land-based, that is connected to, you know, the natural world around us, in order to find, to pull out, to peel some values or starting points. And this is one that is bit by Simon Brakupe, so just honoring his amazing work in the process as one of the teachers. Yeah, just to say that we can, again, like Spy was saying, like not to overthink it, and to try and find ways, like making that offer to folks of like, here's birch bark biting. So what could you use from your cultural material or your practices? So Monique brought up the ceramics. There's beading, there's teachings behind beadings and weaving and sweetgrass. So I think this offer of like looking towards something that you do, that your family does, that's connected to your land, your homelands, like can really help you connect to a way of working that is culturally specific. And you know, like there's birch trees in the city, so you could do this in the city. There's still a lot of land-based work that happens at the core of cities. And I think that's something maybe Jill could close us out on by sort of talking a bit about how we can still do and totally embrace land-based work in urban settings.
Well, with your permission, I'd like to just show something quite short. This was created during a search for, during, a long and ongoing search for Indigenous marker trees here in Toronto. And I came across a tree in a place called Oriole Park, which sits at the southern boundary of the of the original One Dot Village and where I live. And I don't think it's a marker tree or a man, a human manipulated one, but it is a tree that marks something because it marks something. It is a tree that cries out to me to dance. It's a tree, I think, I'm sorry, give me a moment while I share my screen. It is a tree that cries out to me that points me to Deer Park, to the place of game, which is now, of course, a place of grocery stores, pavements, and a little bit of manicured park. But it's I see it, I've always seen it as a beautiful dancer standing with the chest reaching towards the village, northwards towards the village, while this beautiful leg in an arabesque attitude points us towards Deer Park, so called by the settlers because of the immense enormity of deer, the masses of deer that would have been plentiful at the time. And so working with improvisation, thinking about how our bodies may respond to this, I brought in, this is a project I'd hoped to do with many Indigenous movers and dancers, but we didn't get grant money. So it's a cheap little out of pocket project, but still a wonderful improvisation. So you will see the work of Candy Blair, a Ganagahea dancer, who's now based in Toronto, working with this tree I call Nime, that one dances. And I'm just going to show like a minute of this work. Again, it's work that I did with the digital. Can you hear it? Can you hear any music? Good. It's work that I did with the Digital Dramaturgy Project. So they captured her improvisations. We worked several times in the park, and then we filmed. And this is about Candy and myself and people as camera people thinking about consent and how do we even approach this beautiful being.
I was like, how would you approach a being with respect that you might have been detached, like you might be native, but then you might have been detached from the ways in which our ancestors would communicate to these beings in a respectful way. So what's the way that you approach a being that's been harmed for like years and years and centuries and centuries without coming to it as with saying, I'm not a threat. I'm not a threat. I'm not a threat. The first reaction was like, okay, I give you my child. I give you my child.
What you're seeing here is Astad Dibu. He's a Kafaka, the late Astad Dibu. Unfortunately, he passed away recently. In conversation from Mumbai, joining Candy's conversation, improvised conversation with this beautiful Nene, this tree.
dream he was speaking through my mind, speaking through my mind. Speaking through my mind.
Sorry, I don't want to take too much time on that. Uh-oh, what happened to me? Where am I?
We can see you.
Where are you? Okay. Sorry. Obviously, I'm not gaining too much from this digital dramaturgy. I'm trying, but I'm slow. But that's just a beginning of thinking about the messaging we can pick up and experimenting with that, thinking about my own and other bodies in this, and just improvising with this very slowly and carefully, thinking about consent, thinking about what is being revealed, where I'm being directed, and learning, trying to learn in these ways, trying to engage in this very slow, deep listening, which is very process oriented, not product oriented. Although, yeah, so I think that's all I've got to say. Candy said it all. Great.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's a great way to close for this session of our gatherings. I know that we continue to have these conversations and do this work, as many other folks are also having similar conversations. So I'm really glad that we were able to gather today and talk about process, the significance of how our bodies help to translate the stories that we both are interpreting, creating in collaboration with the land and the natural worlds around us. Do we want to have any final send-off words?
Non-human collaborators. It's a term that I learned from you, Lindsay. And that means a lot of things, right? That's energy, that's spirit world, that's animal world, insect world, and I think that that's one of the doorways in, not the only one. And to repeat what you said before, that this way of working is not, it's not a recipe. It's more like this is what I have, what I've been thinking about. What have you got? What have you got? What speaks to you? What's the way that your ancestors told their stories? And it's so rich. It's so rich. Anyways, I feel like we've been talking for a good many years about this now, the four of us. And I feel like it's still just, we're scratching the surface here. I'm seeing more signs of the, I mean, I walked into the studio with Santee after having been away, and there was this enormous list of natural patterns, and they were all different. And some of them I didn't know what they were, things that represent like a honeycomb shape or a netting shape or all these different, I mean, I just read out a few of them before, but there's so much possibility. And I think the challenge in all of this is to not be stopped by the same forces that have always stopped us as Indigenous peoples and as Indigenous artists. And that I really don't have an answer to.
want to say
Well,
Chimiigwech. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, so it's just a really nice conversation, and I think the way Monique summarized that, that was just beautifully said.
I
agreed.
agree. I think Monique said it all. Thank you, Monique. And thank you to Native Earth for bringing us together. And I, for one, feel like I haven't seen beautiful Spy, beautiful Monique, beautiful Lindsay for a long time. You know, of course, this plague has has separated us, and even though we did have some chance to get together, Monique and Spy and I, very briefly in the summer and do some work on the land, we weren't able to work with see Lindsay in person. And so this is lovely. So thank you to Native Earth, to Sue and Brian, and of course Keith, for bringing us together and allowing us to speak together. Miigwech.